Well, hello strangers. Fancy meeting you here. If you follow me on my other social media, it would come as no surprise to you that I do a lot of different content. Some of it to do with fitness, some of it to do with tattoos and art, some of it to do with the degen stuff we all got up to when we were in the military. But one of these is fitness and nutrition. Now, I happen to have a very short story for you guys today. No, genuinely, it's a long story. I had a longer one, and it's 3 days later and just hasn't rendered yet. Love that for me. So, this one's a shorter story, but to make it worth your while and to sort of start bridging into something new than what we've been doing for the past couple of years, you and me, I'm gonna also give you guys a recipe. And I think it comes out kind of orange colored, so it's very in keeping for the season. Ingredients and instructions will be over there. I'll be here telling you the story, and let's get started. We're gonna start this one off with the difficulty of you could fall over and still do this one successfully. Unfortunately, apricots are not in season, so we'll be doing instead a nectarine Julius. Healthy, modified, of course. As I tell you story 391 comes from a friend of mine who went to the same private school I did. He was a few years ahead of me, but we ended up meeting when we both worked in the same place, specifically on night shifts. It was dead night shifts, so we had lots of time to sit around and get to know each other. I don't know if he realizes it, but he was one of the first older teen, early 20s peers of mine that I ever had. He was and remains very cool. Now, if you're going to a private school, chances are you're going to private/Christian other things. And there weren't that many Christian summer camps in our area. In fact, I only know of 2. And wouldn't you know it, my friend, let's call him Tyler, he ended up going to the same camp I did. Mountain Meadows. Sounds pastoral, doesn't it? Anyway, Christian summer camp is a lot like regular summer camp. You get to do nature walks, you get to go swim in a lake, and having gone through survival school and seeing what's lurking in standing water, that's a horror story in and of itself. We also had sing-alongs by the campfire, mostly a lot of jars of clay and newsboys, and arts and crafts, friendship bracelets, and taking 2 pieces of scavenged bark and tying them together in a sort of rustic crucifix. That one's infamous in my house. I accidentally left one in my shorts, and my mom washed it, whereupon it promptly disintegrated and infiltrated all other clothing in the laundry. Very uncomfortable. In spite of the DC talk era of the time, but both Tyler and I recognized that our private school was going through a sort of emo dark period when we attended. Specifically, a lot of the stories and verses that our Bible teacher was teaching us focused on darker things. No color forms of Joseph in the Technicolor Dreamcoat. We were talking about spirits and demonic possession. It's a little deep for an 8th grader, but you do you, boo. Similarly, at camp, those were the ghost stories that were told. Stories about how kids had gone to relatives' houses and gotten a spooky feeling and then found some, Masonic plate or some in a cupboard. And it all made sense. I don't think most of the kids believed it. I think it was just Christian school-approved ghost stories. And after all, who are we to judge anybody for wanting a scare? So at night, at the bonfires, there were the obligatory sing-alongs and kumbayas. But there were also stories like that. Stories of unexplained odors of sulfur coming out of nowhere, of walking into a place and feeling such a weight of presence that you immediately know that you need to flee. Add in a roaring, crackling campfire, the dark woods, and the exhilaration of kids being far away from home, their only source of authority being some pimply 17-year-old named Brandon. And you get it. The way that Tyler told it when he went to bed that night, he definitely felt a little bit of the creeps. But Tyler's a realist, so Tyler thought that it was just psychosomatic. Suggestion of thought. At least he did until about 2 a.m. that morning. Because he didn't rouse from sleep with a start or a cry. He was completely out, the screen is black, and then suddenly, he was awake, staring at the bottom of the bunk that was above him. There was no sound. There was no sensation of anything having touched him. But when he turned his head to the side, he did jump, because sitting on the edge of his bed, staring directly at Tyler, was one of his friends, Alex, completely silent, just staring at him. Tyler laughed, without saying so, assumed that Alex had in fact startled him awake, because Alex was very clearly awake and very clearly looking at Tyler expectantly. And Tyler could guess what that was. See, church camp had a rule, and that rule was curfews. 7 p.m., your butt better be in your bunk, and you're not allowed to leave your cabin until morning. But being surrounded by nature, one must make contingency plans for the call of nature. And the rule at the camp was you could go to the bathroom, provided you brought a buddy. This was not the first time Tyler had woken up needing the facilities or needing to escort a friend. So he starts stumbling around, pulling back on his cargo pants and looking around for his flashlight, which he couldn't find. But Alex was already up and moving towards the door. Tyler trusted that, well, between the two of them, at least Alex probably had his. This is a well-trod, well-known campground, and one that he's been at for a couple of weeks. But there's just something eerie about seeing a place that normally is swarming with kids, lit by sunlight filtering through the trees, and seeing it just still, the way it must look during off-season. Blue light. The light was blue, and everything was reduced to shadows. As it turned out, Alex had not brought his flashlight either. They were walking completely in the dark. Happily, they knew the trail pretty well. See, the trail from the cabin went straight off to the bathrooms before looping out into the woods and out into some area that was off limits. As Tyler trudged along behind his friend, everything felt muted. It hadn't rained, but as Tyler looked down at his feet, realized he was trotting over pine needles and leaves. Yet they sounded baffled somehow. The volume had been turned down on the world, which made no sense. In the absence of all those screaming kids, shouldn't the sound have been heightened? In fact, so distracted was Tyler, watching his feet, that he almost didn't recognize that he was watching his feet going someplace different than he expected. He looked up. He'd just been sort of drafting along behind Alex. Hadn't been paying attention, assuming that since the bathroom was such a well-known location. But now he realized they'd passed it. The campgrounds had a lot of trails running off in and out and everywhere, and they had walked right by the bathrooms and then shot off into the woods. Well, that didn't make any sense. What were they doing in the woods? I'm aware that when men camp, the world does tend to be their toilet, but why risk the poison ivy? This is Tyler's question. Alex is walking ahead. Tyler doesn't want to rouse suspicion because he's pretty sure that they're not supposed to be traipsing off into the woods, buddy or nobody, this late at night. So Tyler calls out, "Alex, where are we going?" "Dude, the bathroom's back that way." But Alex doesn't turn. He just continues to consistently step one foot in front of the other, deeper into the woods. Tyler's following, but he's at a bit of a loss. He's in trouble either way. He's just not sure which flavor of trouble would be the worst one to be in. On the one hand, it's Alex's idea to go into the woods, but Tyler is following, and church school was real big about the responsibilities of followership. That was not going to be a get-out-of-jail-free pass for anybody. But Alex was not listening. He was non-responsive. If he was to just turn around and abandon Alex to his foolish errands, and something was to happen to Alex, well, that'd be no good either. He didn't want his friend getting hurt. And wasn't it strange that Alex didn't respond? Tyler tried again, calling his name as loudly as he dared, but Alex didn't respond. He didn't even move as though he'd heard him. And that's when Tyler put two and two together. Sleepwalking. Alex had to be sleepwalking. It was the only answer for what was going on. And yes, waking a sleepwalker is supposed to be dangerous, but allowing one to walk off into the woods and get eaten by a bear seems exponentially more a threat. That was Tyler's logic, so he decided to reach out and shake Alex awake. And so he did. Tyler reached right out and grabbed Alex on the shoulder and gave him a bit of a shake, again saying his name. "Alex, Alex, wake up." Alex didn't speak a word. There was no physical reaction from Alex. He didn't breathe in, he didn't jolt, he didn't gasp. But he did stop. He stopped with such a suddenness and stood so very still that Tyler immediately pulled his hand away. Just having this sense of the wrongness of that touch. And as he stood there, waiting for Alex to come to turn around and laugh and look around in amazement, saying, "Where am I?" Alex began to turn, mechanically, haltingly. There was something very wrong in the way that Alex was moving. In spite of being able to walk perfectly fine moments ago, his movements were now mechanical, but like a toy that's been wound up and it's close to being completely out. But Tyler stood, watching, until Alex fully turned around to face him, and then looked directly at him, as much as Tyler could tell, because Alex's eyes were black, not dark brown, not a trick of the light. It was as though the pupil had exploded, had consumed the iris and the white sclera. His eyes were complete black marbles, with only the specks of ambient light flickering off of them to indicate movement, to indicate life, to indicate the fact that he was now staring directly at Tyler. Now, those that are not new to the channel might be hearing this and going, "Another black-eyed angel?" Well, what can I say? We went to the same private school. We drank from the same water fountains. And we shuddered at the same church-approved ghost stories. Tyler knew immediately what this thing was meant to be. How could he not? He'd heard the stories for years. And now, here it was in front of him. It was there, staring at him, in the woods, wearing the body of his friend, Nephilim. Possession. He wasn't sure which it was, but he knew it was bad, and he knew he needed to get away from this thing. And isn't that the trick of it? Even back then, I remember those stories. I remember them hyping us up, giving us such terrifying visions and images. And then whenever we'd ask, well, what should we do if this happens? There was always this insinuation that if we encountered that level of evil, that it was because we ourselves were sinning. So to ask for the preventative or responsive measure to deal with it was to admit that you planned to be a filthy little sinner. They didn't really cover a lot of the spiritual defense. We give that point to Hogwarts. And now, what's even worse, Alex is no longer standing still. He's on the move. He is now striding towards Tyler. And Tyler is continuing to take steps back because he doesn't know what this is and he doesn't know what's come over his friend. He just knows he doesn't want it close to him. Now, as Tyler is taking these steps back, his little shower shoes that he threw on just to walk to the bathroom are catching on all the leaves and pine. And he stumbles. He catches himself. But in that stumble, he feels something heavy in one of his cargo pockets. Something he didn't realize he had left there. Not taking his eyes off of Alex, for fear that if he looks away, he'll look back up and Alex will be right up in his face. We've all seen that horror movie. He reached down into his pocket and felt around for, and it was rough in his fingers, but surely even in secular movies about demonic possession, this was what you were supposed to wield, right? To make them cower away from you. And well, it's not like he had a lot of options. So keeping his pace steady and keeping his eyes on his friend, Tyler reached into his pocket and pulled the bark crucifix free. As he did, he swore he saw something flit across Alex's face. Not fear, mirth. And in that split second, Tyler imagined that this wasn't going to work. That the idea of wielding it in front of him and telling him to get thee hence wasn't going to work. And in a panic, Tyler wound up and hucked the thing directly into Alex's face. Alex took it directly on the chin, and Alex shouted in pain. But the momentary glee Tyler had finally stopping his friend ground to a halt because the thing that came out of Alex didn't sound like Alex. It sounded like bleating, like a bunch of goats and sheep. A bunch of disjointed voices all sort of wrapped together into one surprised outcry. Not knowing what else to do, Tyler took to his heels and ran back to the cabin. which is probably what he should have done all along, but hindsight 2020. No longer was Tyler afraid of being in trouble. Facing down a demon-possessed friend will do that to you. So when he came into the cabin, it was all noise. He hit the big overhead lights, and he was crying out for the counselor, saying, "Brandon, I need your help. There's something wrong with Alex." All around him were the surprised mutterings and cries of all of his fellow campers. And then, in the very back of the cabin, he heard a voice he didn't expect to hear, Alex's voice. Equally as surprised, equally as confused and sleep-muddled. "Tyler, if you needed to piss, you should have just told me. I would have gone." Tyler was not to be fooled. He charged over to where Alex was and pulled back the bed sheets, which Alex was quite surprised by. How could Alex be in here when 5 seconds ago he was marching staunchly through the woods and then turning around and going all exorcist on his friend? He looked down at his legs and his feet, expecting to see shoes or dirt or twigs. There was nothing. There was no evidence that Alex had ever gotten out of bed once he'd gotten into it. The question was no longer what's wrong with Alex. The question was, what was that thing? And why did it want me to think it was Alex? When the others inevitably asked, Tyler chalked it all up to a bad dream. He did get in a bit of trouble for leaving the cabin alone without a buddy. But considering what had just happened to him, that just seemed like small potatoes as the kind of trouble he could have been in. Because he definitely left the cabin with somebody, but that wasn't his buddy. When he told me the story, I asked, and he did admit, that Alex was probably in his bed the entire time. And whatever that other thing was probably sat and perched in such a way that Alex wasn't readily visible behind him. Tyler doesn't like that part as much, though, and neither do I, because that introduces a certain amount of intent, doesn't it? If you get a wrong number, somebody calls your phone looking for Deborah, and you're not Deborah. Well, bygones, that's an honest mistake. Just a fluke, two strangers bumping into each other on the telephone wire. But if that same number keeps calling back late at night, and between its breaths the only word it ever says is your name, there's intent, there's a plan, there's something in the woods that wants you specifically, and it'll wear your friend's skin to get you. Apricots would have been better.